This is the most brazen headline by a so-called not conservative leaning or conservative peddling Fleet Street newspaper. The Daily Mirror today, Tuesday, 23rd of February 2021. It's completely corrupt, untruthful, and stupid. And the worst aspect of it is that it is irresponsible, uncaring, and lacking in any concern for the safety of people being exposed to avoidable further infection by the virus. Whoever is writing this script is obviously based in number 10 Downing Street. This doesn't read like a not conservative propaganda sheet. And then the morons contradict themselves, which inevitably they must perpetrate because that is what the Fleet Street cover up, the coverage on the pandemic has been all about. It says, opening time too late to save us. So if that is the case, then what is the point of running that stupid headline splash on the front page? And what we are doing in this particular part is looking at the London Borough of Newham Council. Well, Newham Council has got an elected mayor, the corrupt post of elected mayor. The incumbent currently is Roxana Fayez. Roxana Fayez, on her records, is as corrupt as Sadiq Khan, as corrupt as Steve the Lewisham Bullock, who was very close during the 1980s to Ken Lying Still Livingston, who was in place as the leader of the coup against Andrew McIntosh. The coup that they staged in May 1981 against Andrew McIntosh, who led the Labour group on the then Greater London Council, the GLC, to victory against the Conservatives. The Conservatives had been led by Horace Cutler from 1977 until 1981, when the election took place in May 1981, and Andrew McIntosh successfully led the Labour Party to victory against the Conservatives. And within 24 hours of that election, Ken Lying Still Livingston, along with his co-conspirators against democracy, staged a coup against Andrew McIntosh. And the Kudila campaign has been updating regularly about the facts, original updates, original reporting, absolutely original commentary on the corruption that Ken Lying Still Livingston personified, and to use a later word, embodied in those years. And Ken Lying Still Livingston has been a crook, abusing elected public office throughout his corrupt career, posing as a revolutionary or as a socialist or as a left-winger, whatever. Even encouraging during the 1981 the suggestion that he was the latter day, that is the latest version of Wat Tyler. Wat Tyler was the leader of the peasants, of the 1381 peasants invasion of London. That was completely unsubstantiated but typical of the corrupt propensities and the criminal mentality of the liar Ken Lying Still Livingstone, that he wasted hundreds of thousands of GLC funds in promoting a branch of the propaganda for himself, centering on the historic role played by Wat Tyler in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. We shall be talking about that more in the context of the role of the Poplar councillors of 1921 and the role they played in defending the rights of their poverty-stricken electors in Poplar in 1921, 100 years ago. Our campaign has been regularly publishing original commentary and contrasts with the Poplar councillors of 1921 and the current crop or crops of councillors, including the ward, the Lansbury ward on the Tower Hamlets Council, which is the council that is the merged version of the three councils, Poplar, Bethnal Green and Stepney, that came into being as Tower Hamlets Council in April 1965. And what has happened in the London boroughs that have been lumbered with the corrupt post of elected mayor? These councils are Tower Hamlets, Hackney, Newham and Lewisham. Is that whatever fragile local democracy or local democratic accountability had prevailed when the councils were kind of operated as leader-led councils, is that all the fragile remnants of democratic accountability have been scrapped by the corrupt post of the elected mayor in Newham, Tower Hamlets, Hackney, and Lewisham. I mentioned Steve Bullock, the crook who was an employee of the GLC as a left-wing advisor for the corrupt Ken Lying Still Livingstone-led or misled GLC, because Steve Bullock has proven his corruption and criminality and criminal propensities during his years in post as the elected mayor at the expense of the people and democracy in Lewisham. He also mounted serious abusive assaults on the integrity of many of the campaigners campaigning in Lewisham against corruption of the elected mayor misled Lewisham Council. Various corrupt moves were made by Steve Bullock. And Bullock replied to those criticisms and the campaigning demands by issuing expletives full abuses against the campaigners, their integrity, personal integrity, etc. When we call him a liar and a crook, we are not doing that out of any prejudice against him. We're doing that strictly on the evidence that exists and had existed and has existed of his corruption. I personally observed Bullock and other criminals in the cabal fronted by Ken Lying Still Livingston in the 1980s. And this is one of the reasons why I put about 250 plus kind of individual questions as I directly interrupted Ken Livingstone's propaganda events during the 5 years that I was active to stop the criminality by the GLC and by the Education Committee, which is in other words, known as the Inner London Education Authority. Now, the reason why I say, and I said, that Steve Bullock was a crook and a liar was not anything to do with my having any agenda other than strictly evident and available facts of his relationship with Ken Lying Still Livingston and his gang of anti-democratic GLC members. Steve Bullock was a beneficiary of the corrupt policy adopted by the coup leaders of the Greater London Council against Andrew McIntosh and other not so left-wing members of the Labour Party and GLC. They lied as part of an agreed policy. Ken Lying Still Livingston decided to replace the ordinarily understood sense of democracy and accountability by inserting as many lying kind of clause or options or miniature policies at the expense of the people of London and electors of London. And every single policy that the Ken Lying Still Livingston fronted cabal foisted on London at the expense of democracy was designed purely to enhance the image of the liar Livingston. Whether he genuinely believed that he was the best possible available Labour Party politician who should be leading the Labour Party is not known, because I have not seen any evidence that he believed that he was going to become the leader of the Labour Party. But there is no doubt about the fact that he did believe that he was the best Labour Party candidate for the title of the Socialist Labour Party councillor or GLC leader or whatever. And as part and parcel of that corruptly conceived agenda, Ken Lying Still Livingston sidelined the elected structure, no matter how abusive or how abused that structure was following their coup against Andrew McIntosh. He sidelined them, his so-called colleagues otherwise, and created an entirely false platform by paying millions of pounds to crooks who were operating so-called ethnic minority papers. Remember, that was in the years 1981 to 1986. And one of the beneficiaries was the crook Arif Ali, CROOK, Crook Arif Ali, who was paid probably the highest amount of money from the GLC. And he complied by publishing almost 10 to 20 photographs of GLC activities or Ken Livingston Livingstone in his so-called papers, both of which Riffraff, as I call him, Riffraff Ali actually was funded to launch after May 1981. One was the Caribbean Times, which had the highest number of GLC funding disguised as advertisements. And the other one, which was strictly speaking in order to increase Arif Ali's claim to serve the GLC by showing that he actually was reporting about the Asian community. So it was the Asian Times. And he completely put Asia as being much smaller than the Caribbean in the contents and in his mentality. Although Riffraff Ali has his name based on the fact that his ancestors came from Asia, he actually belittled Asia. Now, Asia is the biggest continent in the world, and it has got between 64 to 70% of the population of the world. And yet, there was Ken Livingstone funding a liar, Riffraff Ali, who put the whole thing upside down. And he made 1/1,000,000th of the size of Asia, bigger than Asia itself. Think about that. Now, Riffraff Ali was a liar, and he was never anything other than a liar and a peddler. And this whole thing by the GLC came up as a complete fit for him and for the liar Ken Livingstone. Even when the thing was called Asian Times, it was stuffed full of activities to do with the Caribbean. And all the activities were, one way or the other, described as achievements of the great Ken Livingstone. So that is the same attitude that Livingstone had when he was given the chance by Tony Blair to become the first elected mayor at the expense of London. How he was ousted, how he was neutralized at the 2008 second election he fought. We have already discussed, but we shall update more on that. That this is not an original kind of topic that we have discussed. We have already discussed it originally several times. And we shall do so more in other editions. So back to Newham and Roxana Fiers. Fiers is the subject of a so-called petition. The petitioners apparently supporting the demand for scrapping the post of elected mayor in the London Borough of Newham. If past evidence is anything to do with the campaign for democracy in Newham, this petition will not be successful for two reasons. One is that most of the councillors in Newham, as far as I can see, are still quite satisfied, meekly, and as they grin in recognition of the fact that they're councillors, while Roxana Fiers is the elected mayor. The record of the Newham councillors is a poor kind of reference, because they didn't remove Robin Wales, who was a corrupt, dishonest, racist incumbent for too long at the expense of the people and democracy in Newham. So the fact that Roxana Fiaz and not Robin Wales is imposed is no kind of evidence of any democratic accountability exerted by the Labour Party or the others in Newham. It was a direct result of continuing corruption by the Labour Party and the Labour councillors in Newham that Roxana Fiaz is in the place, in the post that she is. Roxana Fiaz has got, as recounted by the so-called investigative reporter, who originally called the kind of book he wrote and he published, an expose of the crooked, literally gangsters that had part of Newham Council under their control. He said that Roxana Fiaz had been plotting against Robin Wales since 2013. And he said that Roxana Fiaz was actively conspiring for 4 years with two other councillors in Newham, let's say. One is John Gray and another is a person, I think, of West Indian kind of background. And Roxana Fiaz lied her way into getting nominated as the better alternative for the Labour Party. She was not a better alternative. In fact, she is either as bad as Robin Wales or she is even worse than Robin Wales. Again, we have covered quite a few actual incidents, and factually we have given reports about Roxana Fiaz being a crook and a liar and a stooge of the racists. And we shall update accordingly in due course, but not in this particular edition. This particular edition is to show that Roxana Fiaz is being aided and abetted by the local paper, so-called the Newham Recorder, and that Sadiq Khan gave her a kind of life-saving bribe, if you like, to cover up her failures and cover up his failures. Early on, he gave her more than 110 million pounds, disguised as grant for house building or building homes or addressing the housing crisis in Newham by Newham Council. Despite the fact that it is the highest amount of money given to any council by Sadiq Khan abusing his post as the mayor in the name of London, there has been, in the last 3 calendar years, no public account of what is happening with the money that Sadiq Khan gave to Roxana Fiaz to give her the boost that she needed. The boost being that she was achieving such a huge sum of money, the biggest amount of money issued by the Mayor of London. So therefore, that was her achievement. That is the line. It wasn't because the money wasn't needed, as much money wasn't needed by any other London borough that was facing housing crisis. So Roxana Fiaz was warned by Robin Wales himself on the 14th of March 2018, less than 2 months before the election of 2018, on a satellite channel that is no longer on air, on which I appeared against Robin Wales. I wasn't speaking about Roxana Faiyaz being better than Robin Wales. I was speaking about the post of elected mayor being far worse than the alternative, which was the leader-led council model. But Wales himself issued the statement during the program that lasted half an hour or so, that Roxana Faiyaz was making impractical kind of promises. That was absolutely correct. Because what she was promising and what the Fleet Street liars, and here is the diagnosis of Fleet Street, were repeating, was a whole lot of completely anodyne and stupid and unsubstantiated promises about delivering a better kind of service by the council to the people of Newham. Now, Roxana Faiyaz didn't, of course, write the scripts. It was probably written jointly by John Gray and some other people along with her. And the level of lying, the level of absence of accountability by Newham Council is absolutely brazen. Here is an example. Yesterday, Monday, the 22nd of February 2021, 2 Metropolitan Police persons visited an address in Newham. And during that visit, which was unannounced, they claimed that they were visiting the address to find out about the person they were speaking to at the door. When the person said that they needed time to put on a face mask, the policeman who was doing the speaking refused to stop and allow the mask to be put on. Then when he was asked, the policeman, who in the Newham Social Services, which is what he said, had contacted the police to visit the address, had contacted the police, the policeman refused to give any details. He did record the event on his body camera. And so there is no fact as to why whoever contacted the police and caused the police to make the visit, assuming that everything the policeman said was true. So the person the police spoke to and visited contacted the Newham Council yesterday and asked for confirmation as to who made what communication and when and why with the police in Newham. So there was no reply to the question. There was reply to the communication, but not to the questions. So several communications were sent yesterday, and nobody replied as to who contacted the police and why. Now, this is not an isolated incident. What Roxana Faiyaz does is to deny the existence of most of the communications that are sent to her or to others in the council, either as councillors or as council post holders. And this is something that is a pattern. individuals who are in contact with the NEOM Council or are contacting or communicating to NEOM Council and are not getting the response or the acknowledgement or the answers or the actions necessary may think that they may be alone, they may be isolated. But that's not the case. That cannot be the case. Because apart from Roxana Fiaz being told about the visit, she has been told today, but we are coming to the other communications to NEOM Council that Roxana Fiaz pretends don't exist. So she is lying not on a kind of occasional, kind of periodic basis. She's lying on a permanent basis. So the current campaign to scrap the mayor post is more than justified. But the fact is that even if it is scrapped, the replacement, which would be the leader-led council model, would not deliver anything really in quality terms that the people of NEOM have been denied or deprived of for the last quarter of a century, because Robin Wales became leader of NEOM Council in the late 90s after Steve after the former or previous leader of the council became an MP and gave up being a councillor. So he became a leader or the leader of the NEOM Council in the late 1990s. And during the period of late 1990s, up to the day of the election in May 2018, when Roxana Fiaz got elected mayor, no councillor, including Roxana Fiaz, who was a one-term councillor before that 2018 council election, no councillor in NEOM of any description, broad left, center left, left or right wing, none of the councillors in NEOM challenged the behavior of Robin Wales. And the reason why they didn't do any challenging of Robin Wales was intimidation, corruption, nepotism, gangsterism. And the gangsterism that the writer of the book about the gangster who controlled part of the NEOM Council, let's see what the writer's book says in brief. Now, this is a title of the book that that was published in 2018 is called Legacy: Gangsters, Corruption, and the London Olympics. Now, if we go back to the search, now this guy is called Michael Gillard. Now, Gillard is a journalist in the Fleet Street sense of the term, and he has been associated with The Guardian as well, and he has been promoted, like as in praised, as an investigative journalist. And in a review quoted by the publishers of the book in the Times, the book by Michael Gillard, the book called Legacy, and the Times is quoted as saying, a fascinating, horrifying story of corruption, violence, and murder. Now that's the book that Michael Gillard wrote. And in that book, Michael Gillard said, I'm not reading this actual piece because it would distract from the actual broadcast. What Gillard said in his book was that he met Roxana Fias after the 2018 election, in which she became Robin Wales' successor in post as the corrupt mayor of Newham. And according to Gillard, Roxana Fias admitted in her interview or interviews with him, conversations with him, that from 2013 onwards, or thereabouts, she had been a part of a gang or a group of about 4 or 3, maybe 4 or 5, against Robin Wales. And she also said that once she was in elected post, she found a lot of evidence of corruption and criminality and gangsters controlling Newham Council, and she wanted to take action against the guilty parties. But, said Gillard in his book, Roxana Fias was threatened with serious violence herself, and so she dropped most of her alleged plan to deal with the legacy left behind by Robin Wales. Now that is according to Michael Gillard, who comes across as a typical racist white man who goes out of his way to accommodate any externally westernized and essentially anti-Muslim and pro-racist Muslim woman. That is how Roxana Fias has been treated by all the racists that have promoted her. She was first picked up by the racist Hazel Blears. That was years ago. That was during the last Labour government before the May 2010 election in this country. Roxana Fias was one of 16 or 17 or 18, quote, British Muslim women that were recruited in the first decade of this century as spies within the Muslim community. Muslim spies to spy on the Muslim community in Britain. And the main recruiter was Hazel Blears. Now, Hazel Blears was one of the staunchest racist backers of the racist and anti-Palestinian Una King. And Hazel Blears, before the 2005 general election, openly said, as a cabinet minister in Tony Blair's cabinet, that Muslims were a threat to the safety of this country. Now, to this day, nobody in Britain has produced a shred of evidence that any Muslim, that is ordinary Muslim, is in any way a supporter of anything other than what ordinary other people in Britain support. No evidence has been found, and no evidence can be found, that Muslims support anything other than ordinary order of society. And the same applies to Muslims in the USA, same applies to Muslims in Western countries, including Germany, and including France, currently under the Macron regime of racist anti-Muslim criminals in power in France. Macron is openly repeating Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen's ideology and incitement and hatred being openly copied by Emmanuel Macron is not hidden, it's open. So what we have seen in the behavior of Roxana Fayez, coming back to discussing Newham, is that she dropped the various plans or reported plans to deal with the corruption and end the regime of criminality inside the Newham Council. And one of the things she dropped was, of course, the crimes and criminal legacy left behind by Robin Wales. On the ordinary kind of front, on the ordinary level of democracy, when the head of the Democratic Services team was contacted yesterday to ask about the police visit, or the police's claim that they only visited not on a police matter. Remember, the male police person repeatedly said that it was not a police matter. And yet he was the policeman who was visiting, making the visit. We have been aware of communications having been sent today to the political person on the face of it answerable for the police behavior. That is the current incumbent in the post of mayor at the expense of London, Sadiq Khan. And we shall update on the outcome of what information we can find about his behavior in response to the communication that he has been sent today. But essentially, although the council, the Newham Council, including other councils in London and in the rest of England, have got a thing called Democratic Services. It is essentially what used to be called the town clerks, clerking of the committees of the council, clerking of the committee and clerking of the council itself. Now, due to the pandemic, councils don't meet in the way that they used to, and they remotely meet, but the function of administrating the council and the committees, if there are committees, in committees, councils like NIWAM, where the committee structure has been fundamentally eliminated and removed, but still there are identifiable committee-like activities that must be done because decisions have to be made at gatherings or meetings of cabinet, mayor's cabinet, and mayor's decision-making sessions, etc. So the head of the Democratic Services team was contacted yesterday, and he was asked about who in social services, to use the two words that the police used, had contacted the police to visit the address concerned. The head of the Democratic Services team replied after significant typical procrastination and reluctance to communicate by giving the email address of the social services, so-called, which was sent the substance of the full copies of the communications already sent to the head of the Democratic Services team. So there was no mystery, there was no surprise, there was no need for any additional kind of question or additional material or additional contents to be included. No reply from the email address that the head of the NIWAM Council's Democratic Services provided for these so-called social services. Then he was sent updates saying that nothing has been received from the section or directorate. The same has been sent twice today about the same queries. Now the background to the queries and background to this analysis and this diagnosis is that NIWAM Council has, with Roxana Fiaz's active knowledge and participation and endorsement, brazen liars in posts. Posts director, manager, deputy director, head of the team, and so on. Every section in NIWAM Council that is not covered by Michael Gillard's denunciation of Robin Wales and his regime in the Legacy book, every section is a lying section, a section that has got active liars in post in NIWAM. Think about that. When Fiaz and others in similar positions like the crook John Biggs in Tower Hamlets Council, who is also the corrupt mayor in the corrupt post, every single criminal in post as mayor making critical comments about the UK central government, so-called, fronted by the cabal, fronted by Boris Johnson, saying that the Boris Johnson-fronted cabal of government is depriving these councils of vital fundings to deliver social services, to deliver housing, to deliver welfare benefits, and so on. Every single such claim is factually correct, but only part of the factually correct state of affairs. The matter of what these councils do with the money that they do get, not the money that they have been deprived of, but the money that they do get as part of the so-called settlement between the UK central government and the local councils. every single amount that they do get, and every single council does get millions of pounds, hundreds of millions of pounds. Every single council does get money, and there is no accountability. There is absolutely no accountability for the money by the councils. They've got associations like the Association of London Councils or similar. But none of these associations is held to account by any independent entity or group or organization that has got the support, financial and resource support from any part of the UK government. Anyone who wants to know about local councils in England or local councils in the UK has to remember this point. Like the rest of this program, like the rest of our broadcasts, we broadcast content that is based on original research. And in most of the cases, original research includes empirical research, that is, research with which we, the Khudilar campaign members, supporters, myself, the organizer, are and have been directly involved. You cannot find this in any channel, in any broadcast, anywhere. We assert this advisedly, and we are doing this in my words and on this broadcast that is live now at, what time is it now? In the afternoon of Tuesday, the 23rd of February 2021. It's 14:16 hours GMT. In London, within quotation marks, UK, on Tuesday, the 23rd of February 2021. There is no channel. This is a channel that is online. It's not a terrestrial channel or a satellite channel, but it's online and is accessible by the simple search Khudilar TV. The spelling is up there. And what we have noticed is that we are not only providing originality at every level, we are also not being shown any evidence that anything we have said or we do say or we have been saying or we had said at any point of our campaign, even before the online broadcasting began, is questionable on the facts. That is to say, none of the claims that we have been making is denied, has been denied, or can be denied, because it's all true. Now, in the legacy, Michael Gillard says gangsters, corruption, and the London Olympics. And it's been published by Bloomsbury. Now, when this was happening, the Olympics was happening in August 2012. So remember what we have said in previous broadcasts, that the attack on the Kitten's house in Brick Lane, London, E1, 6RU, were taking place in August 2012. And wait for the repetition of the exclusive about the location. The Kitten's house was located only yards to the north of the building, where the Jamaican Sprinter was based, or his operation was based. So that's the location. And his company was called Puma, Puma, Puma. So while his supporters and kind of organization were active on the few yards to the left of the road that crosses Brick Lane into the next road going west towards the Liverpool Street area, broadly speaking. So the attacks were taking place when the 2012 games were about to begin. And in the street, let's find the street. So you've got to the north a street called Buxton Street that is going off from Brick Lane and into Allan Gardens on the one hand, and Spital Street to the right, to the south. And Spital Street meets or goes past Woodsear Street and into the next road, which is Hanbury Street. And it's the Hanbury Street and Princelet Street that, if you like, were either side of the plotted hole in Brick Lane, Crossrail hole. So in the Buxton Street, it goes through Brick Lane, cuts Brick Lane into Quaker Street. And the Quaker Street continues into Commercial Street. And Commercial Street, and then it goes to Bishopsgate on the main direction, that is, not the Commercial Street, but you can go into Bishopsgate by walking or going by Eldar Street, Folgate Street, and so on. So in the attacks that took place to the right of Buxton Street, if you like, going west into Quaker Street, and to the left of the Quaker Street, and at the junction of Quaker Street and Brick Lane, was the building that housed the operation of the Puma company That was the agency for the Jamaican Sprinter. And we shall come to the full name because the Jamaican Sprinter the Jamaican Sprinter's name is quite funny. They are calling him Hussein, Saint Leopold, but the Hussein bit must have some connection with Hussein, the Arabic name. And it's like the Somalian sprinter in Britain who has been knighted as Sarmo something. The Muslim sounding name Hussein has been dropped and replaced. Now, all this is important because the Puma coat of the sprinter was situated exactly opposite the main road, Buxton Street, in the back of which stood the building on the Code Street. And behind the Code Street building was the back of the Kitten's house. So it's like you can visually see and can hear the conversation. In the Buxton Street, near the junction of Buxton Street and Brick Lane, was a bench on which sat 4 of the racist criminals that had been hired by the SSBA CT, operating as SS Spitalfield Small Business Association. And one of the criminals, who only gave his name as Bert, B-E-R-T or B-U-R-T, was told that he must not do anything criminal as a hired so-called cleaner, hired by the criminals at the SSPA / SSBA CT. And in order to make it legal, lawfully kind of evident, the target of the attacks went to a dubious firm of solicitors based at a building that is no longer there. It has been sold at exorbitant price, and the firm is called, solicitor's firm is called Kingdom. It's a Bangladeshi sole practitioner firm, but it's called Kingdom. It is a device that has been dishonestly kind of adopted by most of the ethnicity-linked operatives who lack the necessary moral integrity or professional abilities to do the business that they are allowed to do. And that is another diagnostic aspect, evidential, original, empirical, of how the licensed law traders are gangs of criminals or individual criminals. granted license by the Law Society, where it comes to solicitors, and by the so-called Inns of Court, 4 Inns of Court, where it comes to so-called barristers. The history of the bar and history of the 4 Inns of Court over the last, let's say, 5, 6, 700 years is a history of corruption and criminality, licensed as legalized gangs and gangsters and criminals. So this is why we call the legal bureaucracy a criminal bureaucracy. And when it comes to race and racism, it's a racist bureaucracy. So these kingdom solicitors, who just shifted since to an address in the Cranbrook Road in the vicinity, in the region of Ilford on the one hand, in Redbridge, London Borough Council. Kingdom solicitors was told to issue a notice against the SSBA CT or SSBA operating with the frontage of the registered charity SSBA Community Trust. Either name. In order to give them warning against doing any criminality on the Kitten's house. Now, the details of Kingdom solicitors will be posted in a dedicated edition of this broadcast. So we go back to the time of the Olympic Games and the legacy, and we just made an updater note about Kingdom solicitors, about Spitalfield Small Business Association operating as a criminal gang under the frontage and the facade of the SSBA Community Trust. Now this criminality became brazen effectively from January 2011. The history of the behavior of the SSBA CT prior to that time and date is different, and we shall distinguish between the differences of events and identities and activities and roles with due evidence and records when we do the detailed, dedicated update on them. Back to Michael Gillard. Back to Michael Gillard and his book, Legacy, in which Gillard actually praises Roxana Fias. Let's see what Gillard says about. Let's look at a short glimpse of the so this is this Gillard entry or entry for Gillard in the is in the internet. And it says organized crime in Neom and Metropolitan Police. And it says that shocking account of criminal gangs' interference in Olympic Bara hits the shelves. And it's written by a woman called Hannah Somerville. Hannah Somerville appears to have some kind of connection with Arabic and the Arab world, but she is no longer on the staff of the Neom Recorder, but she was on the staff of the Neom Recorder. When she was told about the criminality going on with active collusion and complicity of the corrupt Roxana Fias. To this day, there has been nothing, absolutely nothing. It's the third calendar year since Roxana Fias got in as the mayor in the name of Neom. And there has been nothing in the Neom Recorder about the corruption by or in Neom Council. This is important. Because when Robin Wales said on the 14th of March 2018 that Roxana Fias was making impractical promises that she would carry out and implement if elected mayor, or if she was chosen as the Labour Party's candidate for the post of mayor, because that was 14th of March 2018, which was 3 days before she was announced as the candidate for the Labour Party to run as the candidate for mayor in Neom. Anything that Roxana Fias has been sent directly challenging her actions and calling her a liar would, in ordinary understanding, ordinary sense, deserve to be replied to or challenged or questioned. But Roxana Fias has not denied a single one of the claims and assertions and statements that have been made against her to our knowledge in the period since at least September 2018. And yet, there is no evidence that the people of Neom are being mobilized to ditch her and ditch that post that she holds. In a separate kind of video that has been published by the Guardian writer and sometime academic, George Monbiot says that the evidence is overwhelming that Boris Johnson has been very seriously failing. And yet Keir Starmer is nowhere to be seen. Not only Monbiot, but even Katie Bowles, not a George Monbiot type, she is a Spectator editorial staff member and a right-winger and a supporter of the Conservatives. Katie Bowles has said this week that Keir Starmer supports Boris Johnson. And she adds in what they call a wry note, saying, but he says it, he expresses his role in supporting Boris Johnson with a disappointed look or tone. That is how politically dead the Labour Party is in Parliament and in the country. So if that is the case, then it is not only impossible, it is absolutely impossible to imagine the Labour Party fighting or starting to fight a corrupt system, a corrupt post. It makes no difference between the many and the few. It makes no difference between the Starmer and the Corbyn. They are all the same. Neither of them is against corruption. So the people, the electors, the community, and the victims of the corruption of a Roxana Fayyaz, or the corruption of a John Biggs, or the corruption of Steve Bullock, or the corruption of a whoever is the incumbent in Hackney as a mayor. The people are helpless. People are left without any political lead or support or initiative. That's the reality. And that is what George Monbiot failed to understand in his references to the role of the Fleet Street newspapers. Because Fleet Street newspapers are not newspapers independent of the political kind of owners of the newspapers. And newspapers are not there. They're not published to serve the cause of telling the truth to the public. They're there to cover up, to hide. And to press into darkness. Fleet Street Press is pressing into darkness the truth that the public must be told, but are not being told. It is the role of the Brexiteering newspapers and print titles, so-called in Fleet Street, that openly brought about Brexit. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't justified. Brexit was not at all a good thing to do. But the fact that something is good does not mean that it would be supported by Fleet Street. In fact, if something is not good, then Fleet Street will go all out for it to be brought about. Everything that Fleet Street does, the main issues, if you like, is the bad side of the thing that Fleet Street backs. It's not the good side. So when Roxana Fayyaz was told by Robin Wales on the 14th of March 2018, in a program on which I challenged Robin Wales, and I'm on the record as having challenged him and called him effectively a thug and a fascist. Effectively. I didn't use the terms either a thug or a fascist, not because I didn't have the information or the ability or the evidence to call him that. But I knew correctly that if I said any of those things, then the person presenting the program would probably commit suicide on the spot out of fear. That's why I didn't want to spoil the program. Few minutes, but it was worth keeping the program on. That is the decision I had to make throughout the program. I appeared against Wales on that program on the 14th of March 2018 at no notice at all. I was not told before. I was told literally minutes before it was due to go on air. And I had no access to any helicopter or anything to cover the distance from central London to the studio in Poplar in Tower Hamlets. So I used two modes of public transport, bus and the DLR. And I arrived there few minutes after the program was due to start on air. And at first, Robin Wales misunderstood me. It seems that he didn't know who I was. And on that basis of his ignorance, he began his spiel, which is still on the record, poor quality, but still on the record, and it can be seen if anyone needs to challenge it or study its contents. And the main thing I can recall from that encounter with him, I use the term encounter not in the sense of the Bollywood or South Indian cinema blockbusters. They use encounter as the police killing somebody without, putting them through due process. Encounter as in the ordinary sense of the term encounter. When I had the encounter with Robin Wales on the 14th of March 2018, one of the things I said to him and about him to the audience, whatever the number of the audience, was that I told the viewers to notice what he was saying. Because Wales was making claims that were absolutely untrue. So I said to the audience that this is on the record. Remember what he's saying and remember what I am saying. And one of the things Robin Wales said on the 14th of March 2018 on that program, on their satellite program, was that he never says anything he can't back up. And when he says, I never make a promise or something worse to that effect, I can't back up. What he was saying was in response to my principal demand to him for evidence. It was about housing. He started referring to housing. I didn't. And I'm a very kind and generous person. I never take advantage of somebody's misfortune. And I don't exploit somebody's being down in order to take revenge or exploit that position for my advantage. I never do that. Now, if I come across as being, on the face of it, strongly demanding of answers, etc., that would be simply because of the evidence, not because of my intention to take advantage or exploit a person's vulnerability or person's being in low position. When Wales referred to housing, and I didn't, I could have spent the whole of the rest of the program giving the details of the criminality and lying about housing by the Newham Council's liars in post, including by the councillors. And Roxana Fiaz at that point, was still only a councillor. I didn't do that. I could have named the lying employees lying in the council at that time, and I didn't. I could have named others in the council lying, and I didn't. So that was the extraordinary example, one of the most extraordinary, rare examples of somebody with absolute rock solid evidence against the council and refusing to take advantage of that rock solid evidence to expose an opponent like Robin Wales on live television program, which I did. So in my time, I have been always consistent with this principle that I don't exploit somebody's weakness to gain an advantage, no matter how amply and eminently justifiable and justified my taking that kind of advantage would be, legally, ethically, morally, empirically, and in personal terms as well. So when he started talking about housing, I focused on independent objective evidence of his outrageous behavior when he attacked a group of women known as the E15 group. E15 group of mothers, women. E15 is also coincidentally the area where Stratford is, the postcode E15. So when Robin Wales talked about housing, and I pointed out that he had insulted these women, he repeated his lame excuses and denials. And this exchange ended up in my asking him about his lies against the Tories. Now remember, I'm not a Tory. Not only am I not a Tory, I can never be consistent with any position where the Tories are doing anything. And housing is the last place, last topic, last issue that I would find anything in common with the Tories in political terms, in policy terms. So I said to him that if he was claiming, which he was doing, that the housing problem in Newham, or housing problems in Newham, had been caused by the cuts by the Tories as well as by the right to buy housing policy introduced by Margaret Thatcher. If he thought that they were responsible, had he challenged those policies in a court of law or through a court of law? And that is the strongest point in that exchange. And Wales said, repeatedly said, that he had been advised, by which he meant licensed law traders had advised him and the Newham Council, against taking legal action or court action against the Conservatives over the right to buy and related disastrous housing policies. So I said, can I see the advice? And that is where Robin Wales said he never says anything that he can't deliver or he can't. Let me see what he said. So here is let's see the reference to Robin Wales. On 23rd of July, 2018, I produced in the Kudila program an image of the page of Private Eye of that week or that fortnight in the Rotan Bara's column headed Barking's Madness. And it was about, as they wrote, young, vivacious and disabled Lucky Kaur, who was ill in an East London hospital. She was scandalously evicted from her specialist housing. Now that's to do with Newham Council. And it was after Roxana Fayaz got in, and it was in July. And the Care Quality Commission and it was not Newham, it was Barking. And the reason why Newham Council was being mentioned in the same piece was that despite her being evicted by Barking, Lucky Kaur, whose rights and needs were the responsibility of Newham Council by then, was denied the alternative housing she desperately needed, badly needed. And so therefore, what has happened is that Roxana Fayaz has continued the negligence of Robin Wales. And in that continued negligence of Robin Wales, Roxana Fayaz has actually vindicated Robin Wales, who said to me on the 14th of March, and who said on the air, on the program where he was challenged by me on generally, that Roxana Fayaz was making impracticable promises. Not only was Roxana Fayaz already engaged in a plot with John Gray and another two for 5 years or so, she was intentionally engaged in a corrupt careerist journey. Now, the emails that have been sent to her and to the Democratic Services and to others, including the Mayor of London, about the visit made yesterday, Monday, 22nd of February 2021, by two white Metropolitan Police officers. White is being referred to here just as identity for a recognition, not as a description either way of prejudice or preference. When they visited the address in Newham, allegedly on the say-so of social services, presumably Newham Council social services, they only use the two words social services. They must have been given a set of facts, or they must have been told some factual things, whether factually correct, true, or untrue is a still subject of the query that is outstanding. The fact that there has been no acknowledgement of the communication sent to the so-called social services in Newham shows that Roxana Fayaz is operating or heading or fronting a lying regime. A lying regime manned and womaned by hundreds of liars in posts, if not thousands of liars. So the campaign to have the elected post of mayor scrapped in Newham is absolutely justified and justifiable. But whether it will be successful depends on how many people in the community, in the electorate, are being mobilized to campaign how strongly and how solidly to get rid of the corrupt post. Now, the corrupt post is unlikely to be scrapped also for another reason, which is to do with the corrupt monitoring officer in post in Newham Council. And we shall be dealing with the corrupt monitoring officer in post in Newham Council as part of the separate, dedicated broadcast in due course, because the factual components involved are too many to be accommodated in a normal size, normal length broadcast on this channel. Suffice to say that the post of monitoring officer is a scandalous post, a criminal's post as well. Ideally, it should be called the council solicitor or council's head of the council's legal services. But more criminals have been imposed as monitoring officer than there have been honest occupants. Honesty and licensed law trade do not mix. So we go to the kingdom solicitors again and summarize what the kingdom solicitors were instructed to do. They were instructed to write a very evidence-based, strong letter amounting to a notice to stop any criminality by the thugs and criminals, including the criminal Bart and by the criminal Stephanie McDonald, who was imposed as the executive head of the office of the Spitalfields Small Business Association and Community Trust. And those two criminals were given the go-ahead to do the crimes that the targets of the planned attack were aware of. So therefore, they said to the kingdom solicitors, as part of the instruction, that they must not do what they were plotting, that they must not do the damage. Now the conversations, there was a series of conversations between the targets of the criminals' attack on the Kitten's house and the sole cheater at the kingdom solicitors. Solicitor has been spelled out as sole cheater because of the behavior. This sole cheater was told that he need not know all the facts. All he needed to do was to take the instruction at that stage. Remember, at that stage, because it was a preemptive instruction. It's a preemptive notice in order to avoid what turned out to be and what was certain to be a very dangerously damaging attack on the archives and the action files and the campaign devices and materials, and of course on the home of the three kittens. And this edition, this part 2, substantive part 2, because part A was only 1 minute long the first time. So we had a longer part A, but not as long as this one has been. This is now ending as part B at 15:05 hours GMT, London, within quotation marks UK, on Tuesday, the 23rd of February 2001. And we shall continue accordingly the rest of it, and we shall look at the main items of examples of corruption in Fleet Street